Kanye West is dead, in every sense of the word, but physically. Funny enough, he stopped going by the name Kanye West a few years ago now, so it's almost like he's a bit aware of this, but this is still the Ye that we all knew and a lot of us loved, especially myself. He isn't gone, like technically he's still here, but he's still here in the same way that a person's dead body is still here, and that's technically still them, but that body is no longer living. This version of Ye is Ye, but spoiled, rotting, and decomposing. This is only the fault of Ye, though, as he's continued to only surround himself with yes men. And yes men are yes men because they please people in high positions in order to get something in return. And typically, these people are smart enough to fall back when they realize the meat is rotten. However, Ye continues to descend further and further, and the only people that are still saying yes and are desperate enough to still consume the meat that is now spoiled are vultures.
When you hear about slavery for 400 years, for 400 years, that sounds like a choice.
All you fake hard niggas, fuck you. Hold on. Okay. All you fake hard niggas, fuck you.
We with you, you're not with me. No one's with me because no one's really with me. It's just me and God, that's what I'm saying. And I'm still alive.
What's good, YouTube? It's Justice I Used to Be Paying. Today I'm back with another video, and in this video I'm going to be talking about when yes men turn into vultures. But before I get into that, make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Do all those things. It helps me out a ton.
Make me do again.
This album truly was the end of the Kanye that had existed for like the last 20 years or so in pretty much every way. A lot of people like to joke and say that Donda was a retirement album, but there's no denying that there was definitely a shift in energy pre and post Donda. Even though Ye was still doing his wild stuff, saying his crazy, typical Kanye things, there was still that sense of, to borrow a line from Offset, the nigga be tripping, but we love Ye. However, this was the final good project from Kanye, no pun intended, and the last Ye project to feel like a huge deal in mainstream media. Those huge stadium performances and listening parties. In hindsight, it was the perfect send-off for an all-time great. This was the last album before Ye went fully mask off with his anti-Semitism. It was the last album on the Adidas brand, the last album that everyone in the mainstream media could publicly show Kanye love on, including having commercials during the NBA Finals with Sha'Carri Richardson, his last album on a major label before kind of being dropped by Def Jam and no longer having Good Music as his label, and one of the last albums from Good Music in general. The last album with his Christian faith still deep within the project, even though he wasn't heavy on it like he was with Jesus is King. His last album having almost full access to the music world when it comes to collab. His last album working with frequent collaborators and former friends like Jay-Z, Kid Cudi, and Travis Scott. The entire aesthetic for Donda being black and the album cover just being a black screen even fits the theme of this album being a funeral, and also this album being named after the most important figure in Kanye's life who is no longer here, his mother, Donda. In a weird way, to look back at it, everything about this album screams funeral. We just didn't know it yet.
It was a Jewish doctor.
Post Donda is when we get the crash of Ye. First with his divorce becoming public and very nasty. Then we get the beef between him and Kim, him and Pete Davidson, him and Drake, and him and Kid Cudi. Now, at the time, this did feel like your typical Kanye stuff. Nothing too out of the ordinary. Stuff we had seen before until he got a fixture on Jewish people. The anti-Semitic media tour that Ye went on in 2022 was unlike his other rants and tours. He had previously said that George Bush doesn't care about black people, slavery was a choice, and he had even backed Donald Trump while also running for president. But all of these things felt a bit more like select moments that he did things in order to just stick in your mind for that moment. This tour, however, was something that he went on to get as many people paying attention to him as possible, and it really made him feel like he was changing something, pulling the curtain back on the people who had ruined his life over the last few years, the divorce, the loss of friends, and what he was saying was always a self-fulfilling prophecy in Ye's head. There were only two options that were going to play out as a result of Ye and his words in his mind. Either A, what he was saying was true and he was going to face no backlash for his words and everyone was going to be quiet because they knew what he was saying was true. Or B, what he was saying was true, and now he's going to be canceled, debanked, silenced on social media, and all of this would happen because his words were true and that they were going to have to punish him for exposing the truth. And in Kanye's mind, the latter is what ended up playing out. He lost his deal with Adidas and 90% of mainstream media, alongside having tons of his friends in the music industry scared to work with him. Even major labels didn't want to pick up Kanye when he was a free agent. And then comes Vultures. Throughout Ye's career, he's been notorious for hating when people oppose him. Fashion-wise, idea-wise, and especially music-wise. If you've ever seen anyone in Ye's inner circle, especially for years on end, odds are that they have fallen out with Ye. Maybe even fallen out with him multiple times. There's even pretty good odds that they fall out with him and get back together in like this weird repeating cycle that just never ends. The only people that are in Ye's circle, like his real inner circle, for multiple years, even longer than that, with no issues, no fallout, no separation, are yes men. Specifically, if they were with Ye at his ego's peak, which is really just the life of Pablo and beyond. Like, this is when Kanye is no longer just a hitmaker, a rapper, and a producer. This is rap mogul billionaire Kanye West, who now has his own record label and his own clothing brand and shoe that is changing the streetwear fashion world. At this point, he doesn't need anybody. He does what he wants. And to stick around Ye, you're gonna have to kiss the ring. However, when Ye went on his anti-Semitic run, all the traditional yes men kissing butt to get an opportunity to move up in the world, or, tying themselves to somebody who's really accomplished something to hopefully one day pull themselves up to that exact same situation, they went away as they realized there wasn't much to gain from this version of Kanye, and all he was left with were the Vultures. We started to see some of these new faces pop up around Ye, like Milo Yiannopoulos, Sneako, and Nick Fuentes. These people who didn't care about the toxic image and sometimes even made Ye more toxic, who were there partially because, yes, it's the great Ye, the great Kanye West, but more than that, it was an opportunity that most weren't willing to take. This was the most aggressive Ye we had seen to this point. He was spitting vitriol in all corners of the world, including on the people in the room who were with him during his Vultures rollout when he went on that long rant.
I know for y'all gotta say we with you. You're not with me. No one's with me because no one's really with me. It's just me and God. That's what I'm saying. And I'm still alive.
Let's go.
And I'm still alive.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
You ain't post. You ain't with me. You ain't post. When I couldn't see my kids, you ain't post.
Pointing them out for not actually being there with him, saying that he's in a room full of people, but he's still by himself, acknowledging the fact that he knows most of the people in the room are not real. They're not really with him. They're there for an opportunity. They're there to get something out of him, but he still keeps them in the room. And it's not because he's a fool. It's not because he doesn't know what's going on. It's because of his ego and his need for validation. When Ye went on to announce that his album would be titled Vultures, I thought that this would be some sort of like breaking of the fourth wall, winking at the camera in like a Deadpool fashion, letting us know that, yeah, he knows the people surrounding him are vultures. However, when looking at it with hindsight now, he was probably just referring to like cancel culture and like them feeding off the story of his downfall. Or maybe he just thought vultures were cool, which is an also equally possible thing. Ty Dolla $ign has been a consistent collaborator with Ye for years, so it's not like he just popped up out of nowhere and hopped on the Ye train. But I will say, I don't think there's a doubt in my mind that it was a very strategic move to stand so loyally next to Kanye West when pretty much any other sane person would have distanced themselves from him at that moment. And I say that was a strategic move now because we see Ty Dolla $ign and he's no longer around Ye. When Ye doesn't have that same kind of pop that he did even a few years ago when he first took this route, Ty Dolla $ign's gone. I'm not saying that Ye wouldn't have ever collabed with Ty Dolla $ign because there is a quote from 2018 where Ye says that he would like to make a collab album with Ty Dolla $ign one day. I just don't think that it ever would have really materialized if things didn't play out the way that it did, because it didn't materialize all those years ago. And also, I think that if we would have gotten a collab album from Ye when he still had full access to the music industry like he once did, and all his collab partners, this probably would have been a Travis and Ye album or somebody else, but I probably would have put my money on Travis and Ye. I don't think that Ty Dolla $ign would have been his first choice or really even his second choice. But when everyone else got away from Ye because he was too toxic, I truly do believe that Ty Dolla $ign saw this as an opportunity. Yes, you're going to get pulled into Ye's world and all his BS and the media storm and the hate, but Ye is such a hate magnet that really all of the hate is going to be focused on him. Everyone's going to be busy talking about Ye, doing think pieces about Ye. They're not really going to be thinking about Ty Dolla $ign. Now, I will say that there were moments of backlash for Ty Dolla $ign. It wasn't just peaches and cream. People were questioning him, but nowhere near on the level of the questioning for Ye. It was kind of like he was just in the background, and yeah, he got some hate here and there, but overall, for the opportunity that Ty Dolla $ign was afforded, I think that it probably was worth it, and I think that he would agree with me in that sense. Despite always being around and having some big moments in songs, this was by far the biggest period of his career. Ty was always used as a hook guy, the singing melodic guy you called for a catchy hook. He was a feature merchant. All of his biggest stuff was him as a feature, which is cool, don't get me wrong, but this was an opportunity to make himself much more in the limelight, and it worked. The amount of people who had Ty in their Spotify Wrapped or Apple Replay top 5 most listened to artists after Vultures was way higher than anything that ever happened before. They made it 2 full-length projects with both Vultures 1 and Vultures 2, but before they could get to Vultures 3, Ye went on another anti-Semitic tirade online. However, this time, Ty Dolla $ign put out a statement saying that he denounces any form of hate speech. Now, under any normal circumstance, this would be the right thing to do. You know, somebody that you work with, a partner of yours, goes on social media and tweets a bunch of bigoted, hateful things, and you want to distance yourself from that person in that situation. That makes sense. However, all of the stuff that Ye said on Twitter in 2025 is things that he said before on Twitter in 2022. These are the exact same things that he was saying on his podcast run in 2022, long before the first Vultures project. Even on Vultures itself, there are some anti-Semitic bars. The DEFCON 3 tweet on Jewish people, I'm going to go DEFCON 3, came out in 2022 before Vultures. So then that raises the question for Ty Dolla $ign, what's the difference between his anti-Semitic run in 2022 and 2025? And I'll tell you the difference. The difference is this 2025 version of Ye can't really do anything for Ty Dolla $ign's career. There's not that much to gain from working with this version of Ye. There's not the same amount of buzz. It doesn't really help his career in the way that it did a few years ago. At this point, it's just hurting Ty Dolla $ign. The meat has become so spoiled that even a vulture doesn't want it anymore.
I will always love Ye.
Kanye had already shown his interest in the political world with his short-lived 2020 presidential campaign. He had already associated himself with the right wing when he started supporting Donald Trump in 2016 and officially put on the MAGA hat. So his eventual association with Candace Owens, a right-wing talking head who also happens to be a black woman, which is very rare, made a lot of sense, especially because Candace Owens would often be the first one to defend Kanye in the media whenever anything controversial happened in regards to his political beliefs.
If you are an honest person, you did not think this tweet was anti-Semitic.
If you are an honest person, you did not think this tweet was anti-Semitic.
However, underneath the surface of your token neocon black woman is something a little bit deeper. Someone conforming to far-right beliefs. Someone who eventually led Kanye down this path or helped lead Kanye down this path from a regular, somewhat anti-Semitic conservative to just downright Nazism. When they linked in 2022 when that White Lives Matter shirt came out, we understood that Kanye exists to piss people off, but knowingly or unknowingly, knowingly for Candace Owens, they were throwing a bone to the worst racist people you can think of. Candace has made a bit of a mark online with a lot of her anti-Semitic rhetoric and emboldened Kanye in his belief. What Ye always needs when he enters a field that he's not all the way comfortable with is the respect of somebody who's already in that field that he respects. He needs that validation from them in order to feel comfortable going on and doing his own thing. Remember that story of Ye talking about Michael Jackson telling him he could sing, that really like cute, inspiring story that he told on that radio station that one time?
I think Michael the one that put that battery in my back to do 808s. I played Good Life, and he was like, who's that singing right there? I like that voice. It was my voice. He gassed me up. Next thing y'all know, y'all had me in the night here. I was like, Michael Jackson told me I could sing. Fuck all y'all.
Yeah, imagine that, but this time it's somebody ushering him in to these far-right conspiratorial beliefs. Now you ask yourself, well, what can Candace bear to gain from Ye? Of course, one of the biggest stars on earth gives Candace and her views a much bigger platform. Kanye even showed up to the premiere of her documentary that said George Floyd died from a drug overdose instead of the knee on his neck, which was stated by his autopsy report and the court of law. But at the time, Ye was also going to buy a right-wing platform titled Parler, whose whole selling point was freedom of speech for conservatives. The platform was up for sale because at best it was losing relevancy and at worst it was a complete flop. The deal was all lined up to take place, and oh yeah, who was the CEO of Parler at this time of the purchase? George Farmer. Who was George Farmer, you might say? Oh, Candace Owens' husband. Now, the deal didn't end up taking place. It ended up falling through the cracks. It never became public as to why. We don't know if it was a, disagreement on both sides or maybe even a lack of funds, as Kanye was literally bleeding assets at the moment. But at the end of the day, it still remains that Kanye was lined up to buy Candace Owens' husband's failing platform, and I don't think that that was a coincidence at the time. Kanye represents a ton of things that Candace Owens typically would be disgusted by. Kanye is a rapper who uses sexually explicit language and uses profanity in his music. Kanye is somebody that indulges in and sometimes even promotes/posts pornography. His wife walks around naked all of the time. Like, there are so many things that Candace Owens would hate about Kanye West and would bring up and critique him for all the time if Kanye West was a rapper with opposing political beliefs or even no political beliefs. But because he has some similar views politically and is very easily politically manipulated, Candace Owens often defends him, takes his side, and powers him up and uses him as a vessel to get her beliefs out there, because in a typical situation, Candace Owens would never have access to anyone with the type of popularity and clout that Kanye West has.
You are a token!
Speaking of people who would have never had a chance of speaking to someone with this much influence and never really should have had a chance of speaking to someone with this much influence, we get to this goblin, this just absolute internet goblin. All right, this guy is the biggest internet loser you can think of, with no real friends, no women, like all of the stereotypical internet loser tropes. Nick Fuentes is those things, including being a literal white supremacist who hates black people. He believes that race mixing should be abolished and that a white woman who sleeps with a black man might as well have slept with a dog.
Yeah, I don't like it. I don't like race mixing.
What did you say?
I don't like race mixing.
This is a picture of Kanye's family on a completely unrelated note, by the way. This little worm of a human being that doesn't believe Ye and his family should even really exist shouldn't have any access to any sort of public platform, let alone one of the most famous people on earth, but his Nazi propaganda was intriguing to Ye. More people than ever had to hear the rhetoric of this loser because of Ye. Nick is so toxic that even Trump and his supporters won't get near him. He's already been shunned away from somewhat decent society. The best way to get people to hear his message, though, is through somebody much more famous than him, through a puppet much more famous than him, especially when his white supremacist rhetoric is coming from a black puppet, because he can't be racist, right? He's black.
Certified lover boy, certified pedophile.
Another person who is a far-right activist and also a person who is stated to be okay with minors having relations with adults.
But we're talking about 1325, 1328. These things do happen perfectly consensually. Often, by the way, it's the women who suffer in these, because it's not what normally happens in schools very often is it's an older woman with a younger boy, and the boy is the predator in that situation. The boy is like, let's see if I can fuck the gym teacher, or let's see if I can fuck the hot maths teacher, and he does. The women fall in love with these nubile young men, these athletic young boys in their prime, and end up having their lives destroyed. They end up having to move schools, move the country, whatever. The point about all this stuff is we get hung up on abuse. This is a controversial point of view I accept, but we get hung up on this this sort of child abuse stuff. And to the point where we're heavily policing even relationships between consenting adults, sort of grad students and professors at universities. This arbitrary and oppressive idea of consent, which totally destroys, the understanding that many of us have of the complexities and subtleties and complicated nature of many relationships. People are messy and complex, and actually, in a homosexual world, particularly, some of those relationships between younger boys and older men, the sort of coming of age relationships, the relationships in which those older men help those young boys to discover who they are and give them security and safety and provide them with love and a reliable and sort of a rock where they can't speak to their parents. Some of those relationships are some of the most
molestation to me. It sounds
well,
like
you know what?
It sounds like Catholic priest molestation to me.
And you know what? I'm grateful for Father Michael. I wouldn't give nearly such good head if it wasn't for him.
Somehow ended up as Ye's chief of staff, who takes credit for being the person that got a dinner arranged between Ye, Trump, and Nick Fuentes. Mio, being one of Ye's top paid employees, again hammers home the point that Ye has fallen so far that he ends up working with people who never should be able to touch the people with the amount of influence that Ye has, ever. I'm guessing because he's been around political spaces for years, Ye brought him in to be someone with experience and somebody who knows what he's kind of doing in the space, specifically also a right-wing person. However, no regular right-winger or Republican is going to go and put their support and put their livelihood behind Ye at this point because he's just so toxic. So anybody that wanted a political career was not going to go and put their name on the support for Kanye West's presidential campaign. Mio, already losing whatever mainstream political career he had years ago, lied in waiting and jumped on this opportunity, taking himself from somebody who had fallen on complete irrelevance to someone being covered by mainstream headline news again from the years 2020 to 2024, while also being compensated handsomely for it. There's not much on the full relationship between Ye and Mio, just that Mio was running a lot of the things that Ye was doing at the time. But knowing the vulture that Mio is, now that he has separated himself and distanced himself from Ye, I won't be surprised if there's some sort of expose documentary or book to collect a ton of revenue off of his former relation to Ye.
I will continue to defend the movie Cuties.
Like most kids around Sneako's age, Sneako grew up loving Ye's music, idolizing Ye, loving his creativity, being inspired by his career. So it's really not that surprising that he would take the opportunity to be around somebody that he grew up idolizing. Sneako himself, though, has already been labeled as a grifter and been kind of known to be a bit of a vulture due to his constant content switches, from artsy deep thinker to red pill manosphere to far-right content creator to Islam, back to art, and on to whatever he's doing now. Sneako is a grade A opportunist. Whenever he sees a wave growing, he jumps on it and reaps the benefits from it. He was also a defender of the movie Cuties, which is absolutely diabolical. But honestly, of all the vultures that surround Ye and some of the ones that I'm going to talk about in this video, I do believe he's like the least harmful one. Sneako was once one of the biggest streamers in the world, like 2021, 2022. He was one of the biggest names, but he eventually went down that far-right pipeline with his content, and he started associating himself with people like Nick Fuentes and other content creators that were similar, and ended up basically being ostracized from decent society. Sneako's anti-Semitism really kind of got him the boot in a very similar way that happened to Kanye West, just on a much smaller scale. The reason that I say Sneako's the most harmless vulture is because I really do believe that he is taking full advantage of being able to be around Ye, because Ye's not like this super crazy untouchable person anymore, but mostly just because he wants to hang around somebody that he idolized. Like, he's just around him, messing with his music, he's doing interviews with him, he's just really kind of hanging out with somebody that he idolized. Of course, there is stuff to gain from it in terms of like popularity to an extent, but really I feel like Sneako's just kind of living out a part of his childhood dream when it comes to being around somebody that he grew up loving and somebody whose music is a major part of his life. Ye being exiled to the point in which he hangs out with B-list streamers from Kick like Neon and Sneako is probably one of the best things to ever happen to Sneako. Even though he can look at that man and tell that he's not mentally okay and that he's not even the same person that he once was, it doesn't matter. The inner child in Sneako is willing to look past those things and put it to the side in order to live out a fantasy.
Because my top 5 is Drake.
A few months ago, Akademiks suddenly became an orbiter of the Kanye space. The interview that they did went super viral, especially with, Ye's outfit. We saw this relationship blossom with Ye offering to take Akademiks to Japan, having a texting relationship, and even having Ye on stream. You've heard me say this before, but again, I'm going to say it because it's the truth. Despite Akademiks having one of the biggest media outlets in rap, he has never had a true A1 star of rap in an interview. Even though he's buddy-buddy with Drake, he's never had that opportunity before to interview somebody with that sort of star power. So when Kanye hits him up after having no access to mainstream media due to his anti-Semitism, this was like a gift straight from God for Akademiks. Now, I'm not saying that it's inherently a bad thing to interview someone like Ye, especially if you're going to question them and push back on their points and make them fully explain these thoughts that they're having, these controversial things that they're saying. But that's not really what Akademiks did. He essentially just kind of like held a megaphone to Ye's mouth for him while Ye spouted his hateful, disconnected, incoherent points. And the reason that I say that Akademiks is a vulture is because in the past, he's spoken on not platforming somebody who is clearly going through mental health issues, especially self-admitted mental health issues. And he spoke about this when he spoke on FouseyTube, if you don't know who that is, he's a YouTuber, content creator, streamer who's been on the internet for years now. He spoke on this when FouseyTube was going through some really, really bad mental breakdowns live on Kick. And creators like Aiden and Sneako were coming around him and kind of farming the content off of his breakdowns.
Aiden, I'm going to tell you why I felt you were taking advantage of him, right?
Go ahead.
When you guys showed up and just put cameras in his face, knowing that he was acting batshit crazy and that, whether you knew him for a long time and shit, I don't know him, but even as a viewer, I could tell that he wasn't mentally well. You guys were doing that because it was easy, available, free content that was turning your streams up. You didn't have to do much.
I was taking advantage of him?
Of course.
What do you mean?
Bro.
How?
You know what, his behavior was not good for his health, but it was great for content. And the only way might be me telling you, bro, I'm not doing content with you until, bro, none of y'all asked him, bro, are you off your meds? Bro, none of y'all asked him, bro, are you off your meds? Bro, none of y'all asked him, bro, are you off your meds?
This lack of consistency with Akademiks is because, in my opinion, he knows what having Kanye West on his platform will do for him, even if it's not directly on his YouTube, because Ye is saying so much inflammatory stuff that you can't put it on YouTube. Just having that interview alone on his resume does wonders for Akademiks. So in this case, I do believe he was willing to put past his previous morals that he held for somebody else in order to cash in on this opportunity. There are other people in Ye's circle who can fit the description of being vultures, but I think at this point, you understand what I'm trying to get across. These people are pariahs. Ye himself has fallen so far that, he's even lost sight of keeping up with his mental health, even literally losing some of his mental capacity as he's been addicted to nitrous over the last few years or so, and that quite literally kills your brain cells. I want to make sure that it's clear that I'm not trying to absolve Kanye of any of his wrongdoings in terms of his terrible actions or his terrible words, because I understand how the internet is and how they like to misunderstand things on purpose, but I do want to highlight that I think that this is a major part of the reason as to why all of this has happened, why Kanye has kind of fallen into this descent of drug abuse and losing large parts of his money and losing these deals and losing his reputation and his connection with his peers in the music industry and losing custody of his children. It's partially due to the fact that he's never had, or at least not over the last 15 years, anybody to hold him accountable, anybody in his circle that can check him. And when you don't have anybody in your circle like that, when all you have is yes man, eventually when you really do need help, because we're all human, we all need help, all you have around you is enablers, especially for a person who is self-admittedly suffering through a mental illness or trying to live life with a mental illness and is now self-medicating with nitrous. Kanye has thrived for years going against the grain. Ever since coming into the rap game, Ye has been told no. You can't make beats like that. You can't sample like that. You can't rap. You're a producer. You can't rap. You're not a street dude. He rose to be one of the greatest artists of all time by doing what he wanted to do and doing the opposite of what people wanted him to do. By not listening to his detractors, he rose to great status, which makes it a bit more understandable as to why Ye doesn't listen to people who disagree with him. He got so far by turning his ears off to people who disagreed with him, and not only that, but people called him a genius for it. Every time someone told him no, they ended up being wrong. So what happens as Ye continues to grow and become a millionaire into a billionaire with this enormous ego and unchecked mental issues, his issues that were maybe minor grew into massive issues, but because he's come so far doing the opposite of what everyone told him to, he doesn't think it's possible for him to need to listen to anyone saying anything other than yes. Yet the group of people who will consistently and constantly say yes is growing smaller and smaller to the point in which the only people that are left are vultures. If you made it this far, I greatly, greatly appreciate you. Make sure you leave a like, comment, subscribe, do all those things. It helps me out a ton. Leave a comment if you agree, if you disagree. Just tell me what you think of this video and tell me what you think of the things that I said. But regardless, if you made it this far, again, I appreciate you. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Have a great day. Be safe. Be blessed. I go by the name of Pay. Peace.